Thank you for joining us, everyone. We're just admitting all the participants, and the event will get underway in just a moment. Good evening, everyone. Thank you all so very much for joining us here tonight. I'd like to offer greetings to everybody here in the Zoom webinar and to all of you watching on YouTube now and in the future. It's a real pleasure to have you here with us tonight. My name is John Taves, and I'm the event coordinator at McNally Robinson Booksellers in Winnipeg. We're broadcasting tonight from Treaty 1 territory, the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. In addition to thanking all you fine folks for joining us here, I'd also like to thank Alan Lane and Penguin Random House Canada for publishing the book that we are here to talk about tonight. And that book is, of course, Life in the City of Dirty Water, a memoir of healing by Clayton Thomas-Müller. It's a book that braids together the urgent issues of Indigenous rights and environmental policy from a nationally and internationally recognized activist and survivor. The book is already a bestseller here at our store, and no less a person than Roxanne Dunbar-Ortiz, author of An Indigenous People's History of the United States, has called this beautifully written book required reading for everyone who cares about justice, for the survivors of genocide who continue to survive in colonized conditions. Having read the book myself, I'll say that Clayton just has this incredible way of drawing you into the story. Every vignette, every story in the book ends with either an incredible emotional gut, like either a punch to the stomach, a punch to the heart, or just an incredibly funny closing. He's an incredibly gifted stylist, and it's just an incredibly great first book. I wanted to go over a few housekeeping notes before I introduce tonight's participants. Rest assured, you won't have to put up with me for too long. So the format of the evening is that in just a moment, your host and featured author will appear, and they'll have a conversation for a little while. Clayton will offer a few readings from the book as well. Then after a while, there'll be an opportunity for you folks to ask questions. Now, how you do that is if you just click on the Q&A button that's right at the bottom of your screen, you can just type it into that box. Otherwise, there is a chat here tonight, as many of you are already using. So if you do have anything you'd like to say to Clayton, any comments you might have, please feel free and put those personal comments in the chat, and I'll be sure to pass all of those along to tonight's participants at the end of the evening. Of course, one of the most important things about a book launch is being able to get copies of the book. And again, this best-selling book is available from McNally Robinson Booksellers. You can give us a call, you can visit us in person, you can order it online, and we deliver nationally, internationally, and if you're here in Winnipeg, we can even courier it over to your house the next day. So either way, we will find a way to get a copy of this wonderful book into your hands. But that's more than enough for me. I'll be back at the end just to remind you of how you can get copies of it. But first, I'd like to introduce tonight's participants. Tonight's author, Clayton Thomas-Müller, is a member of the Treaty 6-based Matthias-Kalom Cree Nation, also known as Pakatawakan, located in northern Manitoba. He is a campaigner for 350.org, a global movement that's responding to the climate crisis. He has campaigned on behalf of Indigenous peoples around the world for more than 20 years, worked with the Indigenous Environmental Network, Black Mesa Water Coalition, Global Justice Ecology Project, and Bioneers, among others. Clayton has led Indigenous delegations to lobby United Nations bodies, including the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, UN Earth Summit, Johannesburg 2002, and Rio Plus 20, 2012, and the UN Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues. He has coordinated and led delegations of Indigenous peoples to lobby government in Washington, D.C., Ottawa, and the European Union, Strasbourg, and Brussels. It's such a huge privilege to have Clayton here with us tonight. It's also an enormous privilege to have our very good friend, Niigaan Sinclair, here to host the event. Niigaan is Anishinaabe, St. Peter's at Alpeguas, and an associate professor at the University of Manitoba. He is an award-winning writer, editor, and activist who was named one of Monocle magazine's Canada's top 20 most influential people, and he won the 2018 Canadian Columnist of the Year at the National Newspaper Awards for his bi-weekly columns in the Winnipeg Free Press. In 2019, he won Peace Educator of the Year from the Peace and Justice Studies Association based at Georgetown University in Washington, D.C. He is an international media commentator as a part of the Power Panel on CBC's Power and Politics and National Affairs Panel on CBC's The Current. He is also a former secondary school teacher who has trained educators and students across Canada. Please join me in giving an enormously warm virtual welcome to Niigaan Sinclair.
All right, so bonjour and didwe magadaduk. Niigaan webadam Indigenous cost, namagoshin dodem. Nimen wenda mo mayayan. Bojan mishomasak na komasak, mijana gijik na mijini bequet. It's a pleasure to be here. Pleasure to share with you some language of the territory right here at Treaty 1. And of course, we're kind of spread throughout. I look at the list of attendees and I'm kind of course, aware that we are international audience. Clayton, you apparently bring them all in. We're pretty excited for you. And, it's a real honor to be here with Clayton, and we're going to get to talking a little bit about the book in just a minute. But what a remarkable achievement it is to finish a book. First off, having not finished 3 of them myself, and constantly in different stages of finishing them. But I first knew Clayton not through our. Even though we're close to the same age, and of course, I grew up in Brandon, similarly to you. I grew up similarly in northern Manitoba, not quite as north as you, Asher and Interlake. We've been to many of the same places. I kept reading through these, going, I've been there too. Like I've been in Oklahoma, I've been to California. All these different places we've been through, and yet the first time I met you was through your poetry. As a poet. And of course, I included you in Manitowabo because I was like, who is this amazing poet that has just basically wrote a few poems and then never wrote any poems again? And so, Clayton, welcome to, what a remarkable achievement to finish this book. We are so honored that you are here tonight, that you could come and share with us your journey, your life story, and then the really brave steps that you've taken to engage the community in this achievement. So, miigwech, and what I'm going to ask you to do is just, maybe introduce yourself to those who maybe are here for the first time. I know there are a few people who are big-time McNally Robinson supporters who might not know you personally. And then, there are other people, of course, that know you very well. And then second is tell us a little bit about why you did this book, like why this remarkable achievement, why now too?
Yeah, well, thank you so much, John. And thank you, Niigaan, for making time this evening to be here. And, I really hold a lot of respect for you and your family and, all the things that you've done in the world, to help advance Indigenous storytelling, Indigenous knowledge, and of course, everything that your mother and father have done, and your sisters. Like, I really, really appreciate you being here and a part of this evening. Bonjour, Tanse, Zongebeni CNN Tishnakas Kenutotem. Hi, everybody that's here. I see a lot of really wonderful friends and colleagues commenting already, and yeah, I'm pretty shy and nervous. I just want to name that because it's a pretty big deal to put this story out into the world. And I guess to your first question, Niigaan, why did I write this memoir? It was funny. I was on a webinar with Indigenous Climate Action the other day and one of the people that was on there was one of my dear teachers, Andrea Carmen, the director of the International Indian Treaty Council. And she said, "What? You wrote a memoir? You're too damn young." And I said, well, it was more than that, and what I explained to her was that, about 7 years ago, when my sons and their mother, Corinne, and I were still living in the capital city of Canada, and so-called Canada in Ottawa, where my little bears were born. I found myself having a really hard time doing the basic day-to-day tasks that a father does, and not just them, but with my wife, Corinne, I found myself, really having a hard time being present and continually kind of dropping into this kind of autopilot sequence, just kind of spacing out. And so I talked to my therapist about that, and and I said, what's going on here? I don't know why I keep spacing out, And what he told me is, he said, well, it's really common for survivors of residential school, Canada's 150-year-old, genocidal policy of taking our kids away to kill the Indian in the child, to quote our first Prime Minister, John A. Macdonald. He said, it's, and even children of residential school survivors, and both your mom and dad went to the schools, right? And I'm like, yeah. And he's like, well, there's this thing that happens with post-traumatic stress disorder, or what they've been calling Indian residential school syndrome, where, when you have children and you see them, whatever their age is, as you go through the years with them, they're like mirrors, and they reflect back to you, what you went through at that age. And it can cause, it causes a lot of things, but one of the behavioral patterns that it causes is a thing called dissociative behavior, where you just go on autopilot and kind of blank out because of trauma coming back. And I said, well, what the heck am I supposed to do about that? And he said, well, like, keep smoking your pipe, go to sweat lodges, keep going to Sundance, exercise, maybe lose a bit of weight, and do art. And he said, maybe start writing about it. And so I wrote a book, but it was way too fucked up to publish. And sorry, I don't know if we're allowed to swear on here, but it would have re-traumatized a lot of people that I'm still on this journey, of life with, and in our shared experience. And I didn't want to do that. So I talked to my homeboy, who, my co-director, Spencer Mann, of my film Life in the City of Dirty Water, which people can watch on CBC Gem. It's a short documentary of the same title. And I said, yo, Spencer, we do a lot of movement films together, like for social media and whatnot, for, on climate justice campaigning. And I was like, yo, if I raise a bit of funds, do you think maybe you could record me telling stories about being Native and growing up in Winnipeg, and what it's like to be a Native person growing up in the inner city? And he was like, oh man, that sounds like the bomb. Let's do it. And so, for 18 months, we recorded stories on audio and high quality video. And then at the end of it, we fed into Google Voice to Text the audio, and it spit out a manuscript, which we then edited into this memoir. And so it really felt positive to me, because, our Cree language is not a written language, and the art of oration, the art of storytelling, is a very sacred thing in our culture. And, so even though I'm not a Cree speaker, just the fact that this book came from not like me sitting there writing it out, but from actually just breathing life into the memoir, from my mouth on, into Google,
into the recording software. And but I also know how much editing that takes afterwards. It doesn't just come out clean. It's got a, sort of endless editing. It's not easy to do. I was going to say that, it's your book launch, man. You swear as much as you want. So, but, I want to show a few images, just because the book is so beautiful, and it would just be remiss not to have an image or two. I also want to show you an image later that I think is an important element of the book. So I'm just going to share my screen for just a second. And I want to point out to people that this is the, it's kind of a mucky way to look at it, but this is the documentary right here. You can see that? Yeah. Can you see that right there, Clayton? Yeah. Okay. So that's the documentary, of course, or it's the piece that kind of sparked. And I remember you sending this to me on Facebook, and you said, yeah, this is a multimedia project that's going to end off in a book. And I was like, not only is that ambitious, but it's an incredible way to come through to make a project, to make an art project. And then you have this remarkable cover by Isaac and Christy, right?
Yeah, well, the cover is Christy Belcourt, but Isaac did the final art piece inside the book, which was actually the main piece that we used for the theatrical poster of the film. for all of the film festivals that it premiered at Hot Docs, the big documentary film festival in Toronto, and we actually won Best Short Doc, at a Montreal Film Festival. I can't say the en français piece, but it's like Film Festival Under the Stars, and it also showed at Guelph as well, Guelph Film Festival here in Canada. So yeah, Isaac and Christy, big shout out to both. Christy Belcourt and Isaac Murdoch are literally, they're right up there with my colleague. He's in the chat. Dave Solnit. These artists are painting the movement. They're painting Mother Earth. They're inspiring and activating people to, go out into the streets and to, become land defenders and water protectors, and but to also like do it from a place of beauty. And as I grew up, I always remember being told that our ancestors love color and they love beauty, and it's important to whether you're in ceremony doing prayer, or whether you're enacting acts of resistance and defense of our original instructions, to do it in a very beautiful way is very important. So yeah, big shout out to Christy and Isaac.
It's a beautiful cover. It's just a remarkable. I mean, Christy's and Isaac's work. We happen to have a mural at my work that we hired them to do right across from the doors of it, Native Studies, and just remarkable, amazing work. And what a great, beautiful way to start out the book, which leads me to. I want to ask you just one question and then ask you to read a passage. But when you open up the first pages of the book, right after you see this beautiful cover, you see this name. The book is dedicated to Charlton Edward Budd, and I think before we get into talking about what you've written in the book, like you want to talk a little bit about who Charlton was and how important it was that you dedicated this book to Charlton.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, Charlton, he's in the book, and, like so many of our Native families. And I think that's really so important about this memoir is that, yes, this is my story, but like any Native who reads this book is going to be like, yeah, I did the same thing. I mean, that's the way you opened up tonight, Niigaan. And, like Charlton was my cousin, but, he was like more like a brother, because like Christmases and, Easters and, just, whatever, Wednesday nights, whatever, like our families would get together and eat, make soup, bannock, my mom and his mom are sisters, and, and I grew up with him and all his siblings, and, he actually came and lived with us for a long time. And he was always that kind of older cousin, to hustle. And, he was an oil sands worker, and unfortunately, like so many workers, facing hard times in Alberta right now, he ended up committing suicide a couple of Christmases ago. And, so growing up with him, I mean, like him and I went and fought forest fires together when we were teenagers. We worked in slang pizza and fried chicken at the pool hall on my reserve in Pugatawagan when we were teenagers. And we bought our first tracksuits together, and he introduced me to the Beastie Boys, with our money we made from forest firefighting. And so, I wanted to dedicate the book to him and just uplift, that experience that so many of us have with the people that we grow up with. Sometimes things happen, but we'll all come back together again in the good hunting grounds.
Well, I like that you say that too. You'll see, of course, all life is a journey, including the afterlife, or that trip to the West, as we say. And so you'll see Charlton again, and the stories that you include with Charlton's pretty remarkable. I just want to say that I never realized the Cree obsession with matching tracksuits till I went to Norway House one time, and I was like, why is everybody walking around with matching tracksuits? Oh yes, now I know. Now I know that the legacy is true. Okay. What I want to do is I want to ask you to share some of the content of the book. I think you've got a few passages we're going to read tonight. I want to invite the audience members to Prepare your questions. I'm going to get to them after we have a few readings and a little bit more conversation. But we're going to get a chance to ask Clayton some questions. If you have read the book, feel free to bring up what your favorite section is, put it in the chat, or you can also mention it as well. We'll have an ability to be able to, John will be able to control some of the chat to hand those questions over to me to be able to deliver to Clayton. But Clayton, do you want to talk about what you want to read to share from the book? I mean, this book is so intensely readable. I just devoured the whole thing in an afternoon, because like normally what happens when I do these book launches, I kind of read it and then sometimes I skip parts and then I just sort of skim parts and I read. But this one I read everything. A, because I knew so many places and people. And then two is because it's like every chapter has this really amazing teaching in it. So what part are you going to read for us now?
I'd like to share just the opening, like a couple of pages, which are about my father. So, yeah, it's page I think 5 to 7. So, yeah, if that'll be okay, I'll go ahead and jump right into that. How we go say. The first time my father saw an airplane, he thought, it must be an angel. He was 5 years old, standing outside his family's cabin deep in the bush on Pugatawagan First Nation in northern Manitoba. It was before he attended residential school, but Catholicism was already very present in our community, and he had heard about angels from the priests who lived on the res. That day, he heard a strange noise and looked up. He saw a white cross flying through the sky, and he thought, that must be an angel, because what else could it be? He told me that story many years later. We were at the St. Regis Hotel in Winnipeg, and he was drunk out of his tree. It was one of half a dozen times I ever spent with him. Even though I was only 7 at the time, hearing the story triggered something inside of me. I now know that the unsettled feeling that I had was the sudden understanding that I'm only one generation away from living in the bush and being of the land. I'm only one lifetime, everything had changed. My father, Peter Sinclair Sr., was a Cree bushman and a miner. He worked for the railroad. He was also an advisor to political leaders and a writer and a bureaucrat. He was from Pugatawagan First Nation, the easternmost First Nation in our territory, Treaty 6, which spans Saskatchewan and into Alberta. My family is spread out over a vast region from Pelican Narrows to Sandy Bay, a Métis settlement in northern Saskatchewan, through South Indian Lake and Nelson House, Manitoba, where my mother's father comes from, with Pugatawagan right in the middle of it all. These are the territories of the Swampy Cree people, or the Rocky Cree as we call ourselves. My father was actually half Cree. His father, Kino, born Albertland, was a full-blooded Belgian immigrant who was a World War II fighter pilot and a war hero. My grandfather had become disillusioned with his aristocratic life and jumped onto a steamship after the war. He went to the Hudson Bay, got on a dog sled, and went into the bush. He met a woman who became his wife. They created my father. My grandfather was famous in our community of Pugatawagan. He and my grandmother owned and operated a general store. And he built a he had a Clydesdale horse way up in northern Manitoba. He built a root cellar so he could have vegetables in the wintertime. That just blew all the Indians away. My father drank himself to death at the age of 58. I don't know why he drank, but the limited stories he told me about himself gave a glimpse. watching his father die of a heart attack at their general store, being raped by a nun throughout his whole residential school. The last time I saw my father was at Seven Oaks General Hospital in Winnipeg. He still had jet black hair and big, bushy black eyebrows, sort of a kind of look, a bit of a crooked smile. But he was all swollen and yellow with jaundice. The late stages of cirrhosis had kicked in. The last thing he said to me was, Clayton, always so serious. I'm sorry I haven't been a good dad. Take care of your kids. Make some money so that when you're dead, they'll have something. I said, okay, Dad, I'll do that. And I left. I was 26 years old. A couple of weeks later, I flew back to Winnipeg to bury him. And as I sat on that plane, I thought back to my father's memory of the first plane he saw. And here I was sitting in one of those white crosses in the sky on my way to bury him. After the funeral, I drove with the procession to the PA for the second funeral, with my dad's body in a coffin in the back of a pickup leading the way. I slept beside his body at the funeral parlor in Opaskwayak Cree Nation. And then my siblings brought him to our trap line for his third and final funeral service, burying him beside our grandmother. His spirit sat with me for the drive back to Winnipeg, the whole way down Highway 6, and we laughed about all the things we didn't get to work out with. We didn't get to work out while he was still alive. I really didn't know my dad, but I was always thankful to him for giving me life. I never hated him for being a drunk and for not achieving his potential. He had been a very handsome man, intelligent and articulate. People I've talked to from his generation have told me that they thought he was going to be the one to lead our people. From my father, I have 11 brothers and 6 sisters from Alaska to New York, all the way to Brazil. I've known a few of them, and we all have different moms. All of my dad's children took his death differently. Some got angry, some didn't come to the funerals, some were so drunk that they were barely there. Some fought over my dad's earthly possessions, and he didn't have much. And the only thing I inherited from my father was the sport coat he had on when he was admitted to the hospital before he died. It still has his blood all over the front of it from him puking it up. What I really wanted was photos. I only had 1 or 2 of my dad, and he was pretty hammered in them. I don't have any pictures of him looking dignified.
I'm muted. Sorry, I was muted there. What a... I remember reading that, and, as someone who does a lot of work with fathering, with a lot of work with our brothers and our uncles and our fathers, just a really powerful, beautiful scene, painful, and I think that if we were to take the first section of the book, the book is broken up into 5 sections, right? And it's broken up into different elements of your life. So the first section is talking about flight and that image of that flying cross. By the way, that's a pretty powerful image that many Cree people talk about, is the first time seeing a plane as the marker of Christianity, like a really powerful image. But you share some pretty hard truths in this book that were also hard to read, involving your mother. And of course, your various, what you call your different fathers at different stages of your life, many of whom were highly abusive. And Roddy probably gets the some of the most powerful scenes, quite respectful, but then also some scenes that are very difficult to read involving the abuse around your mother. Your book doesn't start with your voice, even though it is dedicated to sorry.
Charlton, yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, then it begins with a letter from your mother. Why did the book begin with a letter from your mother?
Well, my mom was just a kid when she had me, and like, and she went through a very arduous and traumatic journey. She was going to day school at the time in Thompson when she, got pregnant with me. And, her and my dad, they went on a date when she was just a teenager. He was in his 30s. And, he took her to the Thompson Inn, which is this like infamous Indian bar and hotel. And I was conceived in the TI, which for anybody from Manitoba, that's a bit of a stripe, that's some street credit there, right there. But to be real about it though, asking my mom for permission to tell this story was a very important act of it was very important for me to have her consent to share stories from my life, because our lives were so together. I mean, she was a child when she had me, and we went through a lot of the same trauma together at the hands of the same abusers. And I wanted to make sure that she was okay with me sharing the stories that I did share in this memoir. And I omitted a lot, not just about my mother and I, but a lot of people in this book that I talk about, because they're still alive and their loved ones are still alive. So I had to be very thoughtful and mindful, to write these stories or to talk about these stories. And consent, I think, is so important, especially in a shared experience like the ones that I talk about in Life in the City of Dirty Water, especially when it comes to my mom, because she's been the one that's been there my whole life, even though there's been a lot of peaks and a lot of valleys, and I mean, she's my roommate right now, like we live together, her and my guku, and my guku and my mother are my roommates, and I think that's hella cool.
Well, I mean, it's a really beautiful letter that she hands to you, and it's a really beautiful way to start the book. Gail Pelche Miigwech for that just a really beautiful way to begin the book, because it does talk about some very hard things in her life and the hard decisions that she made. But also it does, you say at one point that the entire reason I know love, that I am the strong person that I was able to become, that I was able to be a good parent, is because of all the love that I learned from my mother. And also the fact that your mother introduced you to activism. I mean, she herself would ask you questions, make high demands on you, teach you eventually about things when you were in jail from, Malcolm X, and, just some really profoundly influential moments in your life. And of course, you're probably best known not for your poetry, even though everyone should check out Clayton's poetry in Manitoba. That was shameless self-promotion, by the way. But you should check out Clayton's poetry. It's pretty interesting. And through your activism, of course. And if you don't mind me sharing one more image, just to because I think, okay, by the way, these are the 5 sections in the book that I just love and I think are really awesome. And, I would try to, I am Cree, but my Ojibwe is much better than my Cree. So, but you can see the different sections that talk about this. I want to share, sort of surprise you a little bit by talking about this guy. Yeah, I actually get a bit emotional because he meant so much to me as well. And, Larry, of course, just a remarkable human being who we all love. We left us too early. We all wish we could spend more time with him. He becomes a bit of a sort of an entryway into your activist life. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I didn't expect that. He kind of got me.
I thought I'd surprise you a little bit, just because, it's amazing. I was reading this book and I was going, man, Larry, he did everything for me too,
Yeah, no, for everybody listening, and Larry Morissette and his brother Vern Morissette, they were part of this OG crew, from here in Winnipeg, and part of a crew across Mother Earth. And when I was a teenager, and it's in the memoir, but when I was a teenager and I was trying to, straighten my life out and, and get out of drug dealing and, get back to our culture and be in a position where I could help not just myself, but be of service to our community here in Winnipeg. It was through the Medicine Fire Lodge program that Larry Morissette had started, with some good friends of mine, this program was meant to train, at-risk inner city Indigenous youth on how to do community development organizing in the inner city. But that's what they reported to the federal government. But it was so much more than that. They had developed a radical curriculum, rooted in anti-racism, anti-oppression, and anti-colonialism. And we spent a great deal of time while being taught how to organize, and to foster community self-determination in the inner city, whether it was Central or the North End or the West End, the highly concentrated and densely populated by Native people communities here in Winnipeg. He taught us how to do that from a place of critical race theory, and brought in speakers from gangs to professors that were working on white supremacy and fighting white supremacy, and from hardcore like Indigenous feminists who were trying to teach us all and reconnect us all back to that sacred feminine. And it was a powerful program, and all of it was really tied to really introducing us to our culture and to language again. And so through Larry Morissette, I was able to attend my first Sundance in Saugeen, actually. The old man Boyish's Sundance. He's made his journey now, but that was back in the 90s, and and it was a very profound experience. And through Larry did a lot of like exchange work with Homies Unidos, who were doing gang intervention work with the El Salvadorian gangs in LA.
A couple scenes in Mexico, right?
Yeah,
just remarkable trips that you took with Larry.
He brought us down to in '97 to Oaxaca, where we participated as Indigenous, young people in the storming of the Oaxaca State Capitol Palace with the Zapatistas, who were marching to protest the murder and slaughter of teachers that had happened at that time in Chiapas. And it was life-changing stuff. We went to a sweat lodge in Oaxaca with Zapotec elders, and that was a very humbling experience to go into this brick oven with this naked gukum and to be naked. And
this scene, by the way, is kind of one part hilarious and one part really so deep because it's in the context of this revolution happening. It's a really powerful scene that you have. And then all the stuff, I didn't mean to make this about the Larry Morissette tribute show, but I just want you to know, for me, that was such a powerful moment because as a brother, and we didn't grow up together, but it made me feel very deeply connected because Larry was there for me in many of my hard times as well. And a little bit later in my life, but he was always there for me, and he was always there to really share some very difficult things. One of the most beautiful parts to this book is talking about your relationship with Corin and your relationship with your boys and with your children, right? And but one of the most powerful elements is also talking about your concepts. Every chapter has this really kind of, it talks about your life, and then it ends off just like the passage that you read earlier around kind of a teaching from that moment or what it is that you've learned from that moment. And so we're going to ask you to read another section, short section. And this section's about Daryl. And I'm wondering if you don't mind just talking just very briefly about Daryl, and then maybe share. I don't know if we have a time for that whole section. If you want to read that whole section, go right ahead. But just, we have about 20 minutes left. So anyways, go ahead.
Yeah, no, Daryl Bear is an amazing local community artist. I would call him a community leader, because everybody I know that knows this person, absolutely adores and is inspired by him. When I was a young man, I absolutely idolized this guy. He's a DJ. He actually just released his first set that he's, done in like 7 years, under the name Nikki Volin, or DJ UFO. But he was part of a handful of incredible artists in the 90s, during the era of electronic music warehouse parties, underground warehouse parties. And that was a big part of my urban experience here in Winnipeg, and, a space that I would escape to get out of the whole toxic, kind of masculine environment of hanging out with my brothers and, other gang members within the Manitoba Warriors. I would escape to these electronic music spaces and dance my ass off all night after I was done work. And and Daryl was a very special person to me, even more so than a friend. Like I had a lot of feelings for him. And so and we continue to be friends to this day, but I'll read a little something about him too here, and kind of take it from there. I'm conscious about the audio, so I want to speak right into my laptop here. Daryl became a very good friend. He let me know right off the bat that he had feelings for me. He would always flirt with me, and over time, I got to be open to it. So for a time, although Daryl and I had never made anything formal, we had a profound relationship that was more than a friendship, with elements of compassion and love and respect that felt feminine to me. When I would kick it with Daryl at the end of a big party, I didn't feel like I was cuddling with a bro. We'd be sitting in some dingy warehouse listening to whatever the last DJ was spinning at 6 a.m, smoking cigarettes. Every now and then I would let him make out with me, kiss me, put his arm around me. Not because it aroused me sexually, but because I loved him. The relationship carried over a couple of years, and eventually I had to tell him, I'm not gay. You need to move on and find someone who loves you and who appreciates you and can be what you want them to be, like you deserve them to be. But I'll always be your friend. I'll always be your friend. And I have been. A year or so later, I ran into Daryl with another friend of ours, Travis. And they were on the riverbank with their arms around each other. And Travis was a former best friend of mine. We had both been part of a crew of friends that had all slept with each other and shared lovers with each other. But things got complicated, as they do in those kinds of circumstances. Travis and I had a big falling out, and he started to talk shit about me. When I confronted him, he was two-faced about it. He'd be all nice to my face, but then talk shit behind my back. And because we had a couple of bisexual encounters during group sex, when I saw him on the riverbank hanging out with the only man in my life that I ever felt the same way emotionally about that I have felt about women, it was like Travis was kicking me twice in the face. Not only was he trying to attack my masculinity and how people perceive me as far as being a tough guy by saying he was going to kick my ass, but it also felt he was trying to hurt me by going for my most vulnerable, deepest, darkest secret, the crush I had on Daryl. When I saw Travis and Daryl cuddling by the river, my blood boiled. I shouted, "You." And Travis saw me and he booked it because he knew I was going to stomp his ass. I could run like the wind back then. I caught him and I threw him to the ground. And then Daryl said, "Hey man, Don't be like that. I don't like seeing you this way. I was confused. I told this person I had feelings for that I couldn't give him what he wanted, but then seeing him trying to get what he wanted from somebody else filled me with a jealous rage. I left without beating Travis's ass that night. I felt a sense of loss and sadness that I couldn't be the guy who could treat Daryl right, who could give him all the love, all the attention and affection that he deserved. The soul that I had seen in this man and the dreams and visions and aspirations that he had had shared with me showed me that he deserved nothing but love and light. Years later, I was having a beer with Daryl. We were talking about the old days and the rave scene. He told me that my love for him when we were young men was unrequited, and that I was the one who had been pursuing him. That was very humbling. That was a very humbling conversation that challenged my ego. I had assumed that he was madly in love with me. So many of our native people leave the reserve because corporations destroyed our land and they can't hunt, fish, or trap anymore. But a lot of our gay, lesbian, transgender, queer, and two-spirited relatives flee our reserve because of persecution. Our own native people don't understand how sacred they are, the sacred role they play in the governance of our collective affairs. They bring a different perspective into our community, and they have a unique connection to the sacred. They end up in the inner city expecting to find liberation. They find it at the gay clubs, but the gay clubs are only open certain hours of the night. The rest of the time, they got to deal with people who have just as much baggage as the homophobic or transphobic people on the reserve. I was lucky that I was able to go through my own experience figuring out my sexual identity. I have many relatives and know of many gay Native men who took their own life or they had their lives taken from them through hate crimes. I can't say that I understand what my two-spirited brothers and sisters go through, but I empathize a little because of the romance I experienced with a man. All people deserve to be loved and to love. And how they want to do that is none of anyone's damn business.
I was having just a moment of deep appreciation for. I too have relationships similar to the one that you have with Daryl, and it's taken me a long time to understand that in my own life. So miigwech for saying that, and miigwech for being brave, because it takes a lot of bravery to be able to talk about those feelings and talk about those experiences, and I really appreciate that. Before we get to the questions, we have a couple questions from people who are in the audience. You have written one of my favorite passages, and I might just quote this in one of the I'm not sure where I'll quote it, but I'll quote it somewhere. But one of my favorite passages, of course, because everyone knows you as an activist, of course, with 350.org and all the other things that you've done, and there is a huge chronicling. I want to just give people a little tip of the hat of areas to read. There's some brilliant fights, or a fight with Mary Richard, kind of one of the iconic people within the Winnipeg activism world, and there's a really interesting, powerful thing there. There's a really interesting chronicling of your relationship with Phil Fontaine, the complicated relationship that you've had, but also a really beautiful one where he was still lots of ways a mentor, big force in your life, and he's also a mentor to me as well. And then of course now we're kind of figuring out how do we have a relationship with some of the work that he's doing today, and I think you're very frank and honest with that, which is great. My favorite passage of this whole book, and I want to just tell people, it's on page 100. And I'm just going to read it if you don't mind, if that's okay, if you don't mind. You write that activism is not easy to define. You do it for yourself and you do it for others. Sometimes it requires you to follow the rules, and sometimes the right path is to break the rules. Sometimes you appeal to others' sense of what is right, and sometimes you know what will be a waste of time. Sometimes it means collaboration and compromise, and sometimes it is raw confrontation. Sometimes you ask for what is fair, and sometimes you have no choice but to just take it. I love that passage because it really goes into all the ins and outs of activism. And of course, I've seen you arrested on my Facebook page a few times over the years, and standing up for our lands in various different places throughout the country, and standing up against frankly, the denial and the oppression of our rights as peoples. And so, first of all, so miigwech for that. And then also on top of that I think it's nice to give a human side to it, to understand that activism sometimes also about ourselves and what we need to work through and what we need to think about. There's a really great question here from Lee Huscroft. Do you know Lee?
Maybe. Gosh.
Okay, no problem. I'm going to read you the question and then you can answer it. I met you. I met you first time through 350.org, and at the time, one of Naomi Klein's book launches. The root of your activism seems to come from your mother, but would you say your current member of family was set through the eyes of being a father yourself? So is your activism part of being a father during these times of reconciliation? Is this something to leave your children with?
Well, I mean, yeah, for sure. A lot of what I do is about, one of the goals is to make sure that my sons have the same kind of access to pick the berries, to harvest, the four directions: medicine, tobacco, cedar, sweetgrass, all the things that I grew up with, like those are, everybody always talks about, I hear a lot of my native kin, talk about the fact that, we have responsibilities that are rooted in the original instructions that, our ancestors left to us in the place where Creator put us, according to our creation stories. And as such, we have a different way of thinking about the way that we conduct ourselves in the present generation, always taking into consideration the lessons learned from 3 generations prior, preparing in the present, knowing that the actions we take today will impact the next 3 generations. And so there's the different kind of conceptualization of time that I think Indigenous peoples, that's one of the shared things that we have. And so when it comes to activism, and why I and the people that I share this path with, I think, I'm projecting here, but that why we do what we do is because we want to be responsible, and we want future generations to have those sacred things, like our language, like the teaching lodges, the ceremonies that help our people get through the hard times. And we also have a responsibility, not just to people, but to our other relatives, the ones that fly and that walk on the earth, that crawl under it, and that swim in the water. And so, there's a lot there. And, it's a difficult question to answer, but, for sure, my kids are from you as well. We've got a question here from Olivia McCorston. And the question is, are you mentoring as Larry did? Yeah, for sure. But, it's not without great challenges. I mean, if you read this memoir, you'll see that I've had my own challenges over time, as far as falling back into old, patterns, whether it's with substance abuse or, dissociative behaviors, patterns of avoidance, conflict avoidance, things that come with trauma. I think a lot of our Indigenous men are they're pretty fucked up. And, and one thing in my—
That's actually the title of we should make a title of a book, because I mean, you documented pretty heavily many of our brothers and our uncles. And I mean, you witnessed the inside of, gangs, certainly the hypermasculinity that go within that. Larry talked a lot about that too,
Well, also in the movement, I mean, I've worked in hundreds of First Nations, Alaska Native, and Native American nations, and and almost 9 out of every 10 environmental justice battles, it's the grandmas and the moms and the aunties and the sisters that are the ones that are that build the infrastructure, that do all the work, whether that's like tangible, hardcore organizing, cooking, emotional labor. It's women that, Indigenous women that are leading, today's contemporary social movements. And I mean, the men do show up, and there are some really good men out there, and for sure, the genders in between man and woman, those polarities, and there are good people that do good things, but there's a lot of work to do, I think, to help, I think, Indigenous men, get to a good place where they have access to resources and, safe space to be able to unpack, I think, a couple hundred years of toxic programming, around white patriarchy and toxic masculinity. And, I mean, I've been dealing with that my whole life, and I think it's going to be a lifelong journey, to get to a good place on that, but it's something that I'm committed to, especially because of my sons, Felix and Jackson,
You talk about, there's a really interesting scene talking about watching professional wrestling in Brandon and seeing the Ultimate Warrior. And yeah, like I grew up with those similar images of kind of hyper masculinity, violence towards women. And of course, the kind of solving your problems through violence, through that kind of hyper masculine. And I think that the end part of this book, if I can end off, and of course, we're getting near the end of time, is you end off the book by saying, this is what I've learned about living in the city of dirty water. And your last section is about coming home. And that there's one of my most favorite phrases about Winnipeg, and I hope that you use it regularly, which is that you feel stronger in this place than not it. And so much about what's written about Winnipeg, and I happen to be a person who writes about Winnipeg's, that's my job, part of my job with the Free Press, is talking about how this place is complicated. It gets a bad rap in the national media, but it's still a place that so much life is here. So much work is here. And is there a part 2? Is there another memoir in you at some point? Is there more story to tell in the future, or maybe a poetry manuscript? This is me nudging you.
Oh yeah, no, I'm sitting on a lot of writings. I've been writing quite a bit over the last few years. I think probably one of the stories that I'm most excited about is this story called Manitowabi 2100, which is a science fiction, like a dystopian future where the natives have won, Canada has lost, and like all the native people live in these hyper militarized, walled in like nature utopias where all they do all day is sweat lodge and like shoot deers and moose and like have sex, and it's like awesome, but it comes at a price, and like the rest of Canada is living in these like basically like reserves are now, like with all the toxic industries, and China made a deal, and I won't get into it too much, but basically the main character is this fella named Simeon Caribou, and you got to think like Indiana Jones meets like Blade Runner, and like, Winnipeg has become the new New York because of climate change, and coastal cities becoming inundated, and everything runs on electronic trains, and Churchill's the biggest port in Turtle Island because of the lack of sea ice because of climate change in the Arctic Ocean, and everything getting extracted in Canada is by China, and getting sent to China out of Churchill from a robotic port, and north of Winnipeg, Pinyamuntang, Fairford, is now called Putitang, and it's the new Las Vegas, and it's a floating city run by hyper aggressive, super mega Indian casino gangsters, the leader of which is trans and potentially a lover of Simeon Caribou. I don't know. Anyway, I got a lot of writing about Winnipeg.
I was gonna say, how developed is it? But it looks like it's like right there and ready to go. It's actually ready to be made into a Netflix series, it sounds like.
Yeah.
Oh, that's wonderful.
So, there's a lot of writing I want to do, but like I said, what we talked about at the beginning of the interview, like why my mom's like letter of permission was so important. My old therapist from Ottawa, his best friend was the guy who wrote Angela's Ashes. And he didn't release that book till his mom died because he didn't want to hurt her more than she had already been hurt. And so I'm very aware of that. You know what I mean? Like, there's a lot of stuff to write about as far as what I've seen in the movement and experienced personally or collectively with other people I'm growing up with. But there's a lot of time, and like, I don't want to like add to the trauma that our Native people carry collectively, or that the people I love and that I'm on this journey with, I don't want to hurt them. So, there's a lot of time to fictionalize things and to create beautiful stories. And we see that now. We don't need white intermediaries anymore to get our stories out to the world. Like, big shout out to like the 1491s and reservation dogs, and how that's just like shattering the glass ceiling. And there's so many storytellers out there now. Danny Goulet, with their horror movie there. Oh shoot, what's it called? But yeah, there's just incredible storytellers now, like Indigenous storytellers that are shattering all of the boundaries.
My students can't get enough of Blood Quantum. I mean, they just love Blood Quantum and whatever.
Night Raiders. Sorry, that was the movie. That's winning all the awards. And
Jeff Barnaby's Blood Quantum. There's this cacophony of this explosion of amazing art and also amazing memoir. I mean, there's a great deal. I think one of the questions that you were asked is, you can't write a memoir when you're this young. The fact is that our lives haven't been talked about, haven't been told, haven't been narrated by major publishing houses. And so there is a necessity to hear stories from people as young as in their 30s, in their 20s, talking about memoirs, because our lives are some of the stories that nobody has ever heard about before. So, and I think in this case, this is certainly a story that I've gone on a journey with you, learned a lot about my own city, about my own home, about my own people that I knew and people that we've known together. I heard stories that I had never known about, and I really appreciated hearing about the stories in the early 1990s of your experience with Cody or the Children of the Earth High School, all the different things involving the Aboriginal Center and all of those kind of really interesting moments. So a huge miigwech. And I guess, in a Zoom environment, it's very difficult to give you a round of applause. But on behalf of everybody here, if everybody wants to, thank Clayton, if you wanted to enter that into the chat, I'll give you a round of applause on behalf of everybody here for just a wonderful book. It certainly made my job very easy. In fact, I had too many. I have all these stickies here of things that I also want to talk about. And you also have a bunch of questions that you didn't get to answer from Ken, Elizabeth, and anonymous attendee who wants to know if you're running for political office. And I'm like, I'm going to bet no. If you're like me, I'm like, no, I get asked that all the time. I'm not, no ways. Why would I want to do that?
If ever I ran for political office, the only one I would ever run for within the colonial system would be to be mayor of this beautiful city. Yeah.
Well, that job is coming available. So sounds like something's maybe the serendipity.
Not till my 50s, though. I got a bunch of work still to end big oil with my relatives and to bring up the new economic paradigm that doesn't leave our communities or workers or anybody behind, for that matter. So yeah. Speaking of which, everybody listening, September 8th, we got a mass day of action with 350.org called Canada is Still on Fire. If you come to our website, follow us on our social media, 350 Canada. There's over 60 mass actions that have been registered so far. We're in the middle of a snap election. There's a lot of contradictions. Native people still getting terrorized by Canada and their policies, especially in so-called British Columbia with Fairy Creek, the Coastal GasLink pipeline in Wet'suwet'en territory, and what's happening to the tiny house warriors in the Blue River watershed in Secwepemc territory.
And the harassment of Conasin Manuel in Toronto, absolutely. I mean, the way rights is being trampled on when everybody's occupied with this pandemic is stepped up more than ever.
Yeah, so I really encourage you to follow me on social media. @CreekClayton is my Twitter handle, and for sure check out Canada is Still on Fire. Google that, and, if there's an action in your city that's already happening, join in, help out. And if there isn't, register one. We've got all the tools to help you organize your own action, to hold, all these political decision makers accountable so that they respond to the global triple threat of the COVID pandemic, economic recession at a scale we ain't ever seen before, and of course the existential crisis of the climate emergency. It's going to take every single one of us to throw down to get these decision makers to actually meet the scale of the crisis, at the level that they need to be meeting it.
So miigwech, Clayton, and many people are asking in the chat, where can I get the book? How can I buy it online? Can I come into McNally? So you can check out the hours for McNally. There are limited hours, I believe, although John can probably clarify that in just a second. But John has just posted the link on how to purchase the book. And when you see Clayton again, I'm sure that he'll be happy to sign. That's one of the funnest things about a book launch is the signing parts and the visiting parts. So unfortunately, we can't do that tonight. Although, the part that I like the best, I don't get paid for any of this. I usually get a book at the end. I got an ebook this time, so I didn't even get a real book. Also, the thing that I like the best is John promises me cookies from McNally. John, where are you? Where's my cookies? Will they be delivered to my house?
I sit here shamefully, Niigaan. We can, however, get you a copy of the book.
I will meet you masked up, wherever you like, and sign it, for sure.
Well, after reading about so many of your coffee aficionados, apparently you're the coffee guy. You know about all the good coffee in town. So, so I would love to meet you for coffee and hang out and really appreciate, just so honored that I could be a very small part of this tonight. And miigwech to you, Clayton. I don't know if you want to send out some shout outs to people to say bye to them. I see Ariel's on here too. So Ariel, I've been watching you, of course, for so long, and what an amazing work that you do out there, and many other people who are here. I don't know if you want to give a shout out, Clayton, go ahead.
Yeah, no, just, Ariel, Brahma Mahdi, Jihan Kiran, Olivia. There's just so many of you, and Charlene, huge hug for you, and everybody that showed up tonight. I really appreciate it. Please share this on your social media platforms, and certainly if you got a copy of the book, I will definitely sign it and put something in there like that you want me to say. And I'm really emotional right now. This has been a very special evening. And I'm going to take my sons and their mother now for a very special celebration meal. And I just want to thank you, Niigaan, as well for being a part of this. I have so much respect for you and the work that you do. And John as well, thank you. And McNally and Penguin, of course. And, my agency, Transatlantic Media Agency, and my agent, Carol Ford. There's just so many people, like my team at Life in the City of Dirty Water, Spencer Mann and Anna Lee Popham, my co-editor, Spencer Mann, my co-director for the film Life in the City of Dirty Water. Like, there's just so many people, but especially like my ma, my sons, and their mother, Corinne, who's my bestest friend in the entire world. Just nothing but love to you all. So, kinanasko
John, I hand it back to you. So yeah, miigwech.
Absolutely. No, and thank you so very much, both of you. I will now enter in the spirit of naked capitalism, but for a good cause, in that this book is available at McNally Robinson Booksellers. We're open around 10 to 8 most days, just slightly shortened hours on Sunday. So please do stop by the store. We have plenty of copies, and actually it's sold so well that we have a restock order coming in any day now. So there'll be piles of this book everywhere you look here in the store. It's been such a personal honor and privilege to be a part of this launch, even just in a very tiny way. So thank you so much to Penguin Random House for thinking of hosting the launch with us. Thank you to you, Clayton, for not only sharing your story in this way and putting it out there, but also for being so incredible to work with. And to you, Niigaan, it's always such a huge pleasure to be able to see you in person or speak to you via a camera. And thank you all for spending the night with us too, either now or in the future. This launch will remain live on YouTube, and we'll send out a link via our Twitter feed in just a second, tagging all these fine folks too. So you'll be able to find this video and share it with anybody who missed out, or if you'd like to watch it again. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us here tonight. And please join me in starting a petition to get Clayton's science fiction novel published immediately. Have a wonderful night, everybody. Thanks again.
And ask everyone. Yeah.